Hello everyone, and welcome to episode number 3 of Driving Newfoundland. In this episode, we take you on Highway 1 to Botwood with a stop in Grand Falls, where we checked out the Salmonid Interpretation Center where salmon use the salmon ladders to complete their life cycles. Botwood, Newfoundland was our second stop where we explored the town's history and the area's north and south. Enjoy a bird's eye view of Botwood. So grab some snacks and sit, relax, and enjoy the soundtrack as we take you on another epic adventure of Driving Newfoundland. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Have you been to Newfoundland? Leave us your adventure in the comments section. Thanks for watching. Enjoy! Sheffield Lake in Newfoundland's history is primarily rooted in its geological past as a region that was deglaciated around 12,000 to 13,000 years ago, a period when it was likely still covered by an isolated ice cap after regional deglaciation began. The area's geological history includes evidence of multiple glaciations and glacial events, such as the formation of lodgement tills and a dispersion fan of mineral deposits, suggesting southwesterly and later glacial flows from the topsails. The Trans-Canada Highway reached Newfoundland with the final section completed in November 1965, though it wasn't until 1971 that the route was deemed to meet the Trans-Canada Highway Act standards, aligning with the province's transition to a car and truck-based transportation system after joining Confederation in 1949. Before the TCH, Newfoundland's transportation relied heavily on its extensive ferry and rail networks to connect communities. Following Newfoundland's entry into Canada in 1949, the province began to align its infrastructure with Canadian standards, with the Trans-Canada Highway being a key project. The Trans-Canada Highway Act of 1949 authorized the construction of the highway with cost-sharing agreements between the federal and provincial governments. Newfoundland signed its agreement in June 1950. Construction on the highway continued until 1971, with the last section in Newfoundland near Pearson's Peak being completed in November 1965. Despite this, the entire route was only considered officially complete and built to TCH standards in 1971, marking the end of the initial 21-year construction period. Route 410, also known as Dorset Trail, is an 89.9-kilometer long north-south highway on the northern coast of Newfoundland. It leads from Shepherdville at Route 1 Trans-Canada Highway to a dead end in Fleur-de-Lys. Route 410 serves as the primary roadway access on and off the Baie Verte Peninsula. Baie Verte is the most populous community along the route. In 2022, Route 410 was voted the worst road in Atlantic Canada by the Canadian Automobile Association's Worst Roads list. Kings Point, Newfoundland, is a town on Green Bay known for its forestry history rather than the typical fishing industry of many coastal towns. Its history is rooted in the logging and forestry sectors. The town features unique scenery with natural beauty including icebergs and waterfalls, and is a growing tourist destination for those interested in scenic views and hiking trails. As you cross the island portion of Newfoundland and Labrador, you will encounter a stretch of highway that passes through a breathtaking stand of tall birch trees, followed by a stone fence proclaiming "Welcome to Scenic Green Bay." From here, 2 routes will take you off the beaten path to discover experiences on a grand scale. Green Bay, which includes highlights from Springdale to Kings Point and everything in between, and Green Bay South, the Botwood Trail, which stretches from Southbrook to Brighton with plenty to explore along the way. Amongst the area's many highlights, the entire Green Bay area plays host to a parade of southward bound 10,000-year-old icebergs carved from the giant glaciers of Greenland. These castles of ice can range in color from snow white to the deepest aquamarines and can be viewed from the shoreline throughout these coastal communities. Whales are no strangers to Green Bay either, and there are plenty of opportunities for whale watching in the area, whether by boat or by coastal trail, and sometimes even just from a dockside restaurant. Route 390, also known as Springdale Road, is a highway in the central portion of Newfoundland. It is a very short route running for only 11 kilometers, with its only community, Springdale, as its terminus. Its branch routes, Route 391, Harry's Harbor Road, and Route 392, Beachside Road, run for a much longer distance. Route 390 begins in a rural area at an intersection with Route 1 Trans-Canada Highway, and it heads northeast across Indian Brook and have an intersection with Route 391 Harry's Harbor Road. Springdale Airport, not a scheduled destination, can be accessed from the highway's southern terminus by traveling 1 kilometer east on Route 1. The highway heads northeast through wooded areas for a few kilometers, paralleling the Indian Brook, to enter the Springdale town limits and have an intersection with Route 392 Beachside Road. Route 390 passes through some business districts and neighborhoods, where it passes by George Huxter Memorial Park, before entering downtown and coming to an end at a Y intersection with Main Street in downtown. Southbrook is located in the center region of the island of Newfoundland. The town had a population of 420 in 2021, down from 482 in the Canada 2016 census. Southbrook was not listed as a community until the 1940s, although history documents suggest it may have been in existence as a winter community as early as 70 years prior. Southbrook has historically had a strong logging industry, and at one time there was also a rabbit canning factory in town. The area is rich in Beothuk and Mi'kmaq history, and artifacts have been recovered by local residents which only solidify this history. Roussell's Hill, a prominent hill which rises as a backdrop to the town, was named for an early settler who died to the Indian band at the time. He is known to have caused much trouble for them because of his dislike for natives, and this led to his death. Kona Beach Park is located in Southbrook. Route 380 is also known as the Beothuk Trail. There are 5 communities along the route, beginning with Southbrook at the Trans-Canada Highway Route 1 and ending at the community of Brighton. The route travels through 3 islands, including Pillies Island and Brighton Tickle Island. Triton is the most populous community along the route. Grand Falls Windsor, was named in 1768 by Lieutenant John Cartwright for the waterfall on the Exploits River, but the area remained undeveloped until the Anglo-Newfoundland Development Company and built a pulp and paper mill there in 1909. The town's growth centered on the mill, with people from various communities moving to work, which transformed the area's economy and lifestyle. The mill's closure in 2009 marked the end of an era. But Grand Falls Windsor continues to develop as a proud town known for its natural amenities and central location in Newfoundland.
Soul searching, fall apart, tunnel vision, hiding in the dark. Well, I ain't gonna holler before I really bleed. Salvation or quick fix remedy. You said I never could change. I thought I never could change. They said I never could change. Damn right, never would. Leave the light on. Leave the light on. Just leave the light on. Yeah, leave the light on. If I'll ever change,
the Exploits River is the longest and largest river on the island of Newfoundland that today boasts a healthy wild Atlantic salmon population. Located on this mighty river at the Grand Falls is one of the most impressive salmon enhancement projects in North America, whose story is revealed at the Salmonid Interpretation Center. The highlight of your visit is seeing the king of fish in its natural environment, as they jump the specialty constructed salmon ladder fishway system to migrate upstream to reach spawning habitat. If you prefer to get up close with an underground river experience, visit our lower-level underwater observation area. Our knowledgeable and passionate team members are also on hand to enhance your visit with information and education for a fish-tabulous experience.
They said I never could change. Damn right I never would. Leave the light on. Leave the light on. Leave the light on. Just leave the light on. If I never change, 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 yeah.
We really enjoyed our stop here. The landscape is mainly volcanic rock, with a pristine river flowing through. Watching the salmon climb the ladders was amazing. There is an underwater viewing area where you can admire the salmon in their natural habitat. If I remember, it was only $8 to $10 to enter. A visitor could spend many hours at the Salmonid Interpretation Center. At this intersection, we turn left for our next few days in Botwood. To the right, you would head into Bishop Falls. In 1827, Bishop John Inglis, Anglican Bishop of Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, was on a visit to the colony of Newfoundland, where he consecrated churches from Notre Dame Bay to Placentia Bay. In July, he visited Exploits Island in Notre Dame Bay. He, along with a Mr. Peyton, made a journey inland along the route of the Exploits River, where Mr. Peyton had established many salmon stations. Reverend Edward Wicks also accompanied the men as they sailed from Exploits up the river for a distance of approximately 25 miles and landed at a spot which the bishop described in his journal as having a splendid waterfall, good land, finely wooded with large timber, and rich and picturesque. Route 350, commonly known as Botwood Highway, leads from the Trans-Canada Highway Route 1 in Bishops Falls to Botwood, Point Leamington and Leading Tickles. It is 70.7 kilometers in length and contains several side roads to communities located off the route, such as Peterview and Route 352 that leads to Point of Bay and the Cottrell's Cove Fortune Harbor area. Route 350-17 branches off in Point Leamington and connects the small community of Pleasantview to the main route. Route 350 continues on from Point Leamington for another 25 kilometers north to Leading Tickles, where the road officially ends. Along the way, there is another short road connecting Glover's Harbor to the main route as well. Prior to 1900, Ship Cove, then Botwoodville, and now Botwood was known for its Beothuk presence, logging industry, shipbuilding, and lumbering industries. The name honors Reverend Edward Botwood, who made fiber resources known to the Quebec Goodé Company, which came here and set up a huge sawmilling industry. In early 1904, Botwood became the shipping port for paper made by the Anglo-Newfoundland Development Company mill in Grand Falls, as well as lumber and other commodities. In the early 1920s, Australian adventurous aviator Sidney Cotton was hired by the Newfoundland colonial government to set up an aviation company operating out of Botwood. He pioneered in delivering mail by air, using airplanes to spot seals for the sealing ships and taking aerial photographs of timberland for the A&D Company. He left in 1923 and went on to make a name for himself in aerial photography and as a World War II spy. In 1928, the port was used to ship copper, lead, and zinc ore mined in bookends. Like the paper, it was delivered here by railway, stored in a huge shed, and loaded by large wharf cranes. In 1933, the famous American pilot Charles Lindbergh and his wife Anne landed their seaplane in Botwood Harbor to refuel. He was here for 4 hours, long enough to put Botwood on the map again, and to recommend to the British and American governments and Pan American Airlines that Botwood would be an ideal place as a terminus for the developing transatlantic flights. In 1937, the first experimental transatlantic flights went through Botwood, much to the chagrin of competing big cities such as Halifax, Montreal, and Toronto, and they proved to be a success. Infrastructure was put in place, and in 1939, when regular passenger flights began, Botwood became a familiar name on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. Enjoy some aerial footage of Botwood, Newfoundland. I hope you enjoyed episode 3 of Driving Newfoundland. Stay tuned for episode 4, where we check out the history of Botwood, starting at Killick Island Walking Trail. We then check out the Botwood Flying Boat Museum. We then drive north on Highway 350 to Leading Tickles, and then Glover's Harbor to check out the Giant Squid Monument. Thank you very much for watching, and give us a like and subscribe. Have you been to Newfoundland? Tell us your travels in the comments section below. Take care, and we will see you in the next video.